Hey everybody, it's me, Coral. Welcome back to my channel. I'm here with I went through my list of books that I read this year and I picked out, there are 7 horror books here that I think were my favorites of the year. And these aren't necessarily published in 2019. Some of them were, but they're my favorites that I read in 2019. And also, that's not to say that there weren't some other really great ones that I ended up reading this year, but these are my favorites. So I'm going to talk about these ones. And I think maybe next month I'm going to do like a most favorite, least favorite, but also I get worried about hurting people's feelings. So I don't know. If I do, I don't know. Anyways, let's get into this, because this is what we're here for. My first favorite of 2019 is Something Borrowed, Something Blood-Soaked by Christa Carmen. This was a short story collection that was really excellent. And I've said it probably 1,000,000 times because I feel like every time I talk about short story collections or anthologies, I have to tell you that I don't typically like them very much. So I think you should know that because this was rated 5 stars by me. I really loved it. There was like one story in here that was like, I'm not as interested in this one, but everything else was so good. My favorite in here was Lady of the Flies, I believe it was called. Lady of the Flies. Yes, this was a good one. Another book I dearly loved this year was Wilder Girls by Rory Power. This is kind of on the cusp of being young adult maybe, because the characters in this are, they're still like in secondary school, but this is definitely the content in here and the description of these ailments that these young women get are gnarly, because they're stuck on this island. They've basically been quarantined, and the boarding school they go to is on an island. The island is quarantined because they've all, and not just the women on this island, but the wildlife and like the land itself has started changing, and they've gotten this disease called the tox, and it affects everyone a little bit differently, and it is so gruesome and so crazy. I cannot believe that this was a debut novel. This was outstanding and I loved it so much. The cover is so gorgeous and beautiful. This is not one to sleep on, that's for sure. Okay, I have to include this in the next one because they are some of my favorites, if not my most favorite. I think Grady Hendrix is right now my most favorite author. But this is We Sold Our Souls by Grady Hendrix. And this was a book about a has-been guitarist from a band that was like just about to make it big when they broke up. And the lead singer though went on to have a very successful career, so much so that it's like his death metal stuff has become so mainstream that it's like, I don't know, it's kind of uncanny valley, some of the descriptions that Grady puts in here of like regular ass people listening to this death metal. Not that regular ass people can't love death metal, but it's just like, that's not the norm here in our world. So it was like, almost like funny, like, you know, that whole thing. And this is about the guitarist from that band before it disbanded. Her name's Chris. She's trying to kind of find her groove again. She feels like she doesn't really remember very well what happened, like the night the band disbanded and stuff like that. And she's not able to play any of her music because the lead singer, who went on to be very successful, has kind of like trademarked and copyrighted everything from their old band, which was called Dirtwork. So everything that, all the music that Dirtwork made cannot be played by anybody. It's really bringing Chris down because she is the songwriter. She was a songwriter for Dirtwork, so it's like he's taken away her creative muse. So that's really where the story starts off, but it goes bananas. It goes absolutely bonkers. It is like funny and kind of heartbreaking, and I don't know, everything that I've come to expect from a Grady Hendrix novel. A little bit gnarly, a little bit gruesome. It, I don't know, it made my heart so happy to read this as somebody who grew up, like, Chris could be both my mom or my dad, because that's how they grew up. My dad was really into music. He was a music producer for a while. Like, I was raised by metalheads, so like that's like, yeah, I don't know, I'm kind of rambling now, but it has a special place in my heart because of that. I think it was really well written, and it really surprised me. I heard an interview that he did about this, I think it was like right as this book was released, and he said he didn't typically listen to music like this, so I was like, how did he capture it so good? He did it. It was so good. I love this book. So I guess that brings me to this one. This is My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix, and while that one is like an homage to metal, this one is kind of an homage to 80s pop culture and like pop music. And this is about two teenage girls. I've given this summary so many times, but it's such a great book. They're growing up in the 80s. They're best friends. They've been best friends since elementary school, you know, and so you get a lot of those female friendship dynamics. I've never been a boy, so I'm not really sure how different that is. If you're like best friends, if you're like two dudes being best friends and growing up, but as someone who is a female and has had relationships like these growing up, I feel like this is also spot on, and I don't know how he did it, but you know, they're growing up, they're in high school, and suddenly one of the friends becomes possessed by a demon, and the other girl, she's trying to find out like what's wrong with her best friend because she doesn't, you know, at first really know what's going on. And yeah, it's just a great book about friendship. It's got some super gnarly moments, and I think if you've read this, you know what I'm talking about. So yes, this is another super great book. It's like when you experience something for the first time and it's so good, and you know that like you loved it, so you're happy, but also at the same time you're sad because you'll never experience that first experience again. That's what I feel like when I think about Grady Hendrix books, which is just like a little extra, but that's how I feel. Okay, on to the next one. This is A House at the Bottom of a Lake by Josh Malerman. And this was a very short novella. I sat down and I read this almost in one sitting. I think I'd read like 20 pages, and then I sat down and I finished the rest of it because it was so good and so absorbing. This is about two teenagers. What are the names? James and Amelia, I think, which are my niece and nephew. I have a niece and a nephew who are brother and sister named that. And I have like 10 nieces and nephews, so that's pretty crazy. But James and Amelia, they're going on their first date, and James takes Amelia canoeing, and they find kind of this hidden lake, and in the middle of this lake they see a house under the water, and they go explore it and kind of become obsessed with it. So it's like kind of like a really sweet light romance novel, because that is a really integral part of the story, but that's not the story. Like, the story is kind of their budding romance, but it's like intermingled with this house because they become obsessed with it, and they're out there as often as they can be. And so it's, I don't know, it's really interesting. And there are some really kind of like very atmospheric, spooky moments in this. I wouldn't say that this is like a book that scared me, but I thought it was just so well written. I could not read this quickly enough. I just needed to know what happened, and it was a really great book. I think this is my favorite novella that I read this year. The next one here I've talked about a little bit because I did a trope episode on it, but this is, well, not on it, but this was included in the trope. But this is Bedbugs by Ben H. Winters. This was a story about a woman named Susan. Her and her small family, they live in New York, and they are trying to find a bigger space for themselves, like a bigger apartment. And it's very expensive in the areas they're looking for. But finally they find something that's like gorgeous and cheap and maybe too good to be true. But you know, it seems like characters in books and movies never realize that until it's too late. So they end up renting this apartment, and sort of throughout the beginning of the story, you get snippets of like Susan hearing about things in the media, reading things in newspapers and stuff about a rash of bedbug outbreaks in New York. And so when her daughter gets like a welt on her body, Susan starts to really wonder. She freaks out and is immediately worried that they might have bedbugs. I think that's really where the story takes off. And I don't want to give too much away because this was really good, and it was a good book where it was like you're not sure if the narrator is really reliable or not, which I love because you go back and forth and you're like, are they? Aren't they? Are they? They are. No, they're not. And I love that. I love questioning everything in existence. So this was a good book. And I've never heard anyone talk about it anywhere. It came up when I was looking for like more modern horror about bugs, because there is a lot of more vintage books about bugs and horror, but not too many, at least when you Google search it, not too many that come up. So I'm really glad that I found that one because I might not have otherwise. And last but not least is Gideon Falls by, who wrote this? Jeff Lemire, Andrea Sorrentino, and Dave Stewart. And I'm not sure who illustrated, I don't know. But this is a graphic novel, obviously, and it follows a couple characters, and they're all kind of connected because they start to see this black barn that like appears and disappears. And when it appears, mysterious deaths happen. And this is just really good and weird, and there is some super creepy artwork in here. This is a great start to a graphic novel series. I haven't read the second one yet, which I need to, but this was probably my favorite graphic novel that I read this year. I also read Lock and Key, and I liked that a lot, but everybody knows about Lock and Key, and not as many people know about Gideon Falls. So I can't recommend this enough. I really think that if you like horror graphic novels, that you would probably like this one. It's got a good cast of characters so far, a good solid base with some weird people and some troubled people and all sorts of great people. And I know that this is it's just a great beginning. So that's it. That's all I have for you. Thank you for watching. I would love to know if you've made a similar video like this, because I love to watch stuff about people's favorites. I love it because I always get so many good ideas for books I want to read. Otherwise, you can just tell me which ones you loved the most this year. And they don't have to be 2019 releases. They can just be books that you read this year. I would love to know. So leave me a comment and stuff, and I will talk to you guys later.